Test of trust. Labour and the SNP pushed the Prime Minister on what she did and didn't know about whether a Trident missile misfired. Downing Street now say Theresa May was told about the test when she took office, but wouldn't confirm or deny it went wrong.
I find it utterly disgraceful that we were not told what went on right back last June, and we had to find out about this test in a newspaper report this weekend.
Also this lunchtime, is toast toast? The government advice saying some of our favourite foods could cause cancer. And so it begins after the ceremony and the protest. Today is President Trump's first day in the Oval Office. Plus, the once new town celebrating 50 years. Happy birthday, Milton Keynes.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hussain.
Good afternoon. Is this the first real test of trust for Prime Minister May? Reports at the weekend claim an unarmed Trident missile veered off course last summer. Today, Downing Street wouldn't confirm or deny that operation had gone wrong. But they did admit Theresa May was told of the test when she took office, just weeks before MPs voted to renew the UK's nuclear deterrent. That is, despite her refusing to answer questions about the operation yesterday. Our political correspondent Paul Brand has the latest.
Among all the huge questions about the value of Trident, has the government really hidden the small issue of whether it actually works? Not the submarines and their crew, which pass all tests, but a rogue missile that veered towards America rather than Africa. A mistake which has made the Prime Minister a target herself as she hosts a cabinet meeting in the Midlands today. MPs want to know why she didn't tell them about the test, and the Defence Secretary behind her will have to peel off back to London to answer their questions.
I find it utterly disgraceful that we were not told what went on right back last June, and we had to find out about this test in a newspaper report this weekend. And quite clearly the Prime Minister would have been preparing for a major speech on Trident, and she was unable yesterday. She completely refused to tell us whether or not she knew about the incident and what she knew about it. I find that completely unacceptable.
The malfunction reportedly took place towards the end of June last year. Today, Downing Street confirmed Theresa May was briefed about the test when she became Prime Minister the following month, though not necessarily about the rogue missile. But just 5 days later, Parliament voted to replace the nuclear deterrent.
There is no greater responsibility as Prime Minister than ensuring the safety and security of our people.
When she made that speech, 2/3 of MPs backed her. The vote would almost certainly have still passed if they'd known the details. But MPs on all sides are angry they were left in the dark, even if some blame her predecessor, David Cameron.
This is something that fell into Theresa May's lap, assuming she was told about it in the very few days between becoming Prime Minister unexpectedly early, and therefore I would expect that it would be sensible for him to try and clear the matter up.
The question now for this government isn't just what they've failed to say before about Trident, but what they'll come out with this afternoon.
And we'll find out at 3:30 whether the Defence Secretary is a fully functioning deterrent himself when he faces a barrage of questions from MPs. Downing Street insists the effectiveness of Trident is unquestionable. It passes all tests, but they won't confirm anything about this rogue missile. And that is what MPs are going to want some details on, particularly as they didn't get them first time around.
Well, thank you. Well, the Prime Minister had wanted the focus for today on her plans for the future of Britain's industry once we leave the EU. She says she'll prioritise broadband, transport and energy and provide more support for business. Our business editor, Joel Hills, is here. How will this plan go down with business then?
Well, look, there's been, I think it's been, the vision has been greeted warmly. I think the key here is whether it can be turned into something that looks like reality. On a day that a lot of the hullabaloo and the political hullabaloo is around Trident, bear in mind the new Dreadnought class of submarine is being built and designed by a company called BAE Systems, a British company with a global reputation for excellence. And that's what the point of this industrial strategy is. The Prime Minister wants more BAEs in all sorts of sectors, and they've identified 5 key sectors in the economy. One of them is nuclear. You're looking now at a picture of Hinkley Point, which is one of a fleet of new nuclear power stations that the government wants built over the next few decades. Now, a lot of the technology that's going to be used in these nuclear power stations is going to be French, it's going to be American, it's going to be Japanese. Controversially, it will be Chinese too. Britain used to be a world leader, no longer. And this is one of the sectors, along with low-carbon vehicles, the creative sector, industrial digitalisation, that the government wants to take a more active role in nurturing British businesses for the future. The way it's going to do it is by helping negotiate trade deals abroad, by reducing regulation and by improving skills. Now, as I say, that's the ambition. The reality is at the moment that there's not a lot of money that's been pledged to this. And I think businesses will want to see more funding before they get too excited about this. But nonetheless, this is a start. As the Prime Minister says, in the 1970s, we had an industrial strategy. It was all about picking winners. This is about creating them. But that requires money as well as ambition.
Joel Hills, thank you. Government scientists are warning that frying and toasting food for too long could cause cancer. The Food Standards Agency has launched its Go for Gold campaign to try to stop overcooking starchy foods like bread and potatoes. They say the browner the food, the higher the risk, and it means a cancer-causing chemical is being produced. But cancer charities say there's not enough research to back up the claims. In a minute, we'll speak live to the FSA. First, Sejal Karia has the details.
If you prefer your toast dark brown or your roast potatoes crispy, the warning from food experts today is rein back and eat them less browned, as they're a potential cancer risk.
There's potatoes, root vegetables, bread.
And they've released this campaign video to drive that message home, in which the Food Standards Agency says cooked at high temperatures, starchy foods produce a harmful chemical called acrylamide.
We know that acrylamide causes cancer in rats and mice in the laboratory. We know that it interacts with the DNA, with the genetic material in the cells, and because of what we know about acrylamide, it's probable that it could also cause cancer in people.
So how is acrylamide formed? When cooking foods like toast, the water, sugar and amino acids present combine to give it its taste and texture. But cooking it above 120 degrees starts the browning process and also produces acrylamide. The browner the toast, the more acrylamide is present. The advice is to eat chips and toast that are golden yellow in colour. But Cancer Research UK is cautious about today's warnings.
There's also been studies looking at people and what they eat, and they haven't really shown any clear link with acrylamide. So we can't say that there is a risk, and we certainly can't say how big of a risk it might be.
The worry is many people will see this as another scare story from scientists and dismiss other more important health warnings. Sejal Karia, ITV News.
Well, let's discuss this further. I'm joined now by Professor Guy Poppy, who is the Food Standards Agency's Chief Scientific Advisor, and Sir David Spiegelhalter, who is a Professor in Public Understanding of Risk at Cambridge University. Thank you both for coming to talk to me on this issue. Professor Poppy, if I can start with you, let's pick up on that point we just heard. We're being warned about sugar, we've been warned about carbohydrates and fat. Is there a danger, and alcohol, that people are overwhelmed by all these public health messages? And so overwhelmed, they just simply ignore them all.
That is a problem. One of the things that we are really keen to say here is we're not saying do not eat any particular product. We're saying actually having a mixed and balanced diet, which is actually equally applicable in terms of the issues you raised, is one way of reducing the amounts of acrylamide that you can get to, alongside various cooking processes that you can use at home or industry can use in the preparation of food to reduce the total amount of acrylamide that you in your lifetime will be eating in your diet.
It's quite a complicated message there, isn't it? When is a slice of toast too brown, for example, in terms of practical terms?
Yes. Well, what we're trying to do here is, as I say, reduce the total amount that you will be eating in your diet. Recent work, which is why we're talking about this today, has shown that if you look at the diet of a typical person in the UK, and it's similar to many other parts of the world, the total amount of acrylamide is a little bit too high in relation to what risk assessors would say.
Before I bring Sir David in, where is the evidence for that, that acrylamide is bad for human beings?
The evidence is twofold, really. One is we know acrylamide can cause cancer, and there's lots of animal studies to show.
In animals?
In risk assessment and toxicology, it's very difficult to do some of those studies in humans, but the more important point is they adopt what's called a margin of exposure. That is, the amount that you eat as a human needs to be very, very different than the lowest amount which causes a problem in animals. And if it's not, then toxicologists say you should reduce the amount.
Sir David, is that enough evidence for you?
I don't think it is. I think this is being over-precautionary. Acrylamide is not a new discovery. People have known about it for ages. And there's been substantial efforts to try to determine whether there is a link with cancer, 16 large epidemiological studies, which haven't shown anything consistent. And of course, yes, it could be a carcinogen in humans. It is in mice at high enough doses. But as Guy said, it depends on the dose, and at the moment, even people who have a lot of acrylamide in their diet because of the way they're toast or potatoes, it's well less than 1/100th of a dose that might cause an increased risk of tumours in mice.
And is it a confusing message, therefore, when people are being warned about all these things that they shouldn't be eating?
I do feel that if you're going to start giving advice to people, you should at least be able to say, what is the extent of the current harm, and how might that be reduced if you act in a certain way? And certainly that's the case, of course, with smoking advice and alcohol and with obesity, which we know.
Very briefly, is this irresponsible advice from the SFA?
I think it's over-precautionary, let's say that.
OK, Sir David and Professor Poppy, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'd like to hear your views on this issue online. Go to our Facebook page. Just go to facebook.com/ITV News. Next, President Trump is about to begin his first working day in office. The turbulent relationship between his team and the media dominated this weekend with a row over the number of people who had turned up to watch his inauguration. Our US correspondent Robert Moore is in Washington. Robert, will the real work start today, do you think?
Well, it's been a weekend, as you've just said, of complete turmoil here. And certainly the Trump presidency is now in the business of trying to regain its footing. We're expecting to see the president in a couple of hours in the Oval Office signing a series of executive orders, particularly withdrawing the United States from a number of free trade pacts, both in the Pacific and North America. In other words, the protectionist inaction. We also understand that he might begin the process of moving the American embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv up to Jerusalem. That's going to be incendiary, especially for, of course, the Palestinians. And we're also expecting a press briefing, which is going to have tremendous sort of credibility issues associated with it, given that Sean Spicer, that's the White House spokesman, gave that car crash of a statement on Saturday night in which he told a number of clear falsehoods about the size of the inauguration crowds. So, yes, I mean, really, we have an administration kind of under siege here. There are also reports circulating this morning that the current and new National Security Advisor, General Mike Flynn, is under investigation by US counterintelligence agencies for links to Russia, and in particular for conversations he had with the Russian ambassador here in Washington. So, to put it mildly, throw into that the mix of sort of reports of power struggles inside the inner circle, you can see it's going to be a very challenging week ahead.
The incredible times go on. Robert Moore in Washington, thank you very much. Thank you. Still to come.
She's done it.
Who's next for Qantas as Britain's women's #1 powers into the last state in Australia? And we look back at the history of the new town that was born 50 years ago today, but not everyone wanted it.
Well, being Londoners down here, we just don't like them. We're country bred and born, and we like the country as it is.
But first, the mother of a barman whose body was found washed up on the Isles of Scilly has welcomed the news that police are to look at the case again. The inquest into Josh Clayton's death heard he'd been involved in a scuffle at a party before he went missing and that he could have been pushed into the water. Rupert Evelyn has more.
When Josh Clayton disappeared, his case was treated as a missing person. Now, though, it's being reviewed by detectives with experience of serious crimes. After a 16-month fight by his family, there is a sense of vindication for those who loved him.
Because of the way that the investigation went, they were just adamant. They would only have tunnel vision. It was only a missing person. And I kept being told, only a missing person. No, it's a missing branch of our family. It's a huge hole in our family that needs answers.
It took 10 days to find the body of the 23-year-old. He was last seen at a party with colleagues at a shed on the private island of Tresco, in the Isles of Scilly. The belief was he drowned accidentally. His family disagreed. Their own investigation revealed potential evidence involving a scuffle at the party police knew nothing about. As a result, his inquest was halted, so police could re-investigate.
I'm not saying we're going to get all of the answers, but if it was investigated properly from the very beginning, from day one, we wouldn't be where we are now. So it's cost us mentally and physically and financially to get to where we are, which is absolutely disgusting in this day and age.
There's been no murder on the Isles of Scilly since 1976, and while the evidence doesn't yet point to such a serious crime, there are legitimate questions to be asked. Devon and Cornwall police are now considering asking another force to review the case in the hope of finally revealing the truth about the death of Josh Clayton. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News.
Police have described a shooting at a busy petrol station in Belfast at the weekend as reckless madness. Dissident Republicans opposed to the peace process are being blamed for the attack that's left one officer in hospital. Our reporter Paul Riley is in Belfast. What other details have the police given, Paul?
Well, these two young police officers were making their way across a garage forecourt in North Belfast last night when they came under attack. Now, eyewitnesses said they heard loud bangs. That noise was high-velocity gunfire. One officer was struck around 3 times. He sustained injuries to his arm. Now, luckily, no one else was hurt in the incident. Police today have described the attack as completely reckless. They're blaming violent dissident Republicans opposed to the peace process. In recent years, they've been responsible for the murders of police officers and prison officers.
This officer was a member of the community. He was attacked, but actually other members of the community were at massive risk as well. And the people who did this did not care whether who they murdered last night.
Well, police recovered a car not far from the scene. It'll now undergo a detailed forensic examination. A 36-year-old man arrested in connection with the attack is still being questioned. As for the police officer, well, he had to undergo emergency surgery, but he's now recovering in hospital. Now, while there's a relief that no one was seriously hurt, this attack serves as a timely reminder as Northern Ireland prepares for an Assembly election that there are still some here wedded to violence.
Paul Riley, thank you. To tennis now, and while Murray fans still can't believe he's out of the Australian Open, they can console themselves by watching Britain's women's #1, Johanna Konta, who's delivered another impressive performance to power her into the quarter-finals. Who is she to face? The incredible Serena Williams. Chris Cunningham has more.
Only 2 years ago, Johanna Konta wasn't even in the world's top 150. But on Sunday, she looked every bit a potential Grand Slam champion.
That is class.
She's the last British player standing at this year's Australian Open, and in Melbourne's blistering heat, the world #9 showed just how ruthlessly efficient she has become.
She's done it.
Taking just over an hour to dispatch Katerina Makarova 6-1, 6-4. Konta will now be looking to better her run at last year's Australian Open, where she reached the final 4. But standing between her and the semi-finals this year, the ever-daunting figure of Serena Williams.
She's one of the few players who's still playing who I watched growing up. So as a young girl wanting to be a professional tennis player, it's honestly an incredible honour.
An incredible honour and a true test of skill, but having not yet dropped a set this tournament, she's clearly aiming to go all the way. Chris Cunningham, ITV News.
Olympic boxing champion Nicola Adams is set to turn professional after announcing she's leaving the GB boxing programme with immediate effect. Adams, who won gold at both London and Rio, has been released from her contract and will not be part of the next Olympic team in Tokyo. Finally, it's concrete cows and 124 roundabouts have been mocked since they were created. But the residents of Milton Keynes are celebrating its 50th birthday today. The post-war new town, with its grid of streets and office blocks, has often led to unflattering comparisons with Russian architecture, but also praise for a pioneering spirit. Ben Chapman's been taking a look back.
2, 1.
It may be turning 50, but compared to other towns, it's not even middle-aged. None of those celebrating Milton Keynes' birthday knew it when it was born.
Milton Keynes is a tiny village in the heart of North Buckinghamshire.
It's half a century since people here learned the government's latest and largest new town would be built on the fields around them. A few years later, a 6-year-old Rebecca Rich and her mother were among the first newcomers to arrive.
As the new housing estates were built, they incorporated play areas, and so we would go out each weekend and find a new play area to play on and all the new climbing frames, and so for a child it was just a paradise, really.
I think there was a sense of excitement and anticipation, the thought of a whole new city centre within easy driving distance.
It was a pioneering plan, laid out on a grid to allow easy expansion. A city designed for the car, but filled with trees and new parks, cycle paths and underpasses. No high street, but a shopping centre that made you feel like you were outside.
The people loved it. Mrs. Smith loved it. And so did her husband, and so did her kids.
And yet, for many outsiders, this is what came to symbolise Milton Keynes. Concrete cows for a concrete creation. But these teenagers disagree.
We're not a concrete town, as many people think we are. We do actually have loads of green space, which is one of the really special things which I love about it.
I'm one of those people that would love to travel the world, but I can see myself coming back here.
Today, the population has swelled to 250,000, attracting 11,000 businesses, a model exported to new towns around the world. A dream of planners and politicians that's built its own history. Ben Chapman, ITV News, Milton Keynes.
That's it from me. Mary Nightingale will be here with the ITV Evening News at 6:30. Bye-bye.